Hello and welcome back. I'm Bennett with Painting with Bennett, and hardcore fans might notice that I'm wearing the same exact shirt as in the last video. It's almost as if I have a big backlog of footage to get through and I'm just recording all of these in one day. Who'd have thought? Anyway, this video is covering how I painted another commission painting project. This time, it's for a totally new game though. The game is Bushido. It's sort of like an oriental fantasy skirmish game, and the faction is the Cult of Yurei, which is a spooky sort of puppeteer, death and zombies and skeletons sort of faction that probably don't have everyone's best interests in mind. For this commission, I was able to sort of paint these minis however I wanted to, and I was really inspired by all of the ghost enemies from Sekiro. The creepy look of the Okami warriors, the headless, and the ghost spirit bosses just really seems to fit with me for these Cult of Yurei minis. I think the minis that I'm painting from this faction can be broken down into a few different categories. There's, first off, the skeletons, which is most of the minis that I'm painting. It's just skeleton boys with a bunch of smoke effects. Then there's the schmucks, which are kind of like either zombies or just regular people that are really not having a great time. And then third is the puppeteers, which are kind of like the remaining few minis that seem to be like the witches or sort of like the mastermind people who are summoning all the skeletons and zombies. I don't really know the deep lore of this game or this faction, but that's what I'm assuming from the models. My approach to painting all of these minis will be the same, but with some slight variations depending on if I'm painting a skeleton or a non-skeleton mini. It's minor enough that I'm not going to separate them out though. Just note that not all of the steps will be necessary on all of the models. And with that, I'm not doing anything too fancy to begin with, just airbrush base coating the minis with a light pastel purple color, then doing a strong zenithal highlight of pure white. Most of the skeletons have a sort of smoky, magical effect on them, which I make sure to spray entirely in pure white. From there, I start to do a lot of blocking in colors with some speed paints. Nothing fancy at the moment, just trying to get all the colors established. Starting with the clothing, I want it to be mostly white with some purple accent pieces. The majority of the clothing just gets painted with a cold whitish gray color. The accent bits will get a purple speed paint mix. I use periwinkle purple with just a little bit of purple swarm mixed in, and sometimes I thin it slightly and apply several coats of it, sort of building up color in the shadow areas more, but for most of the minis I just did one single coat of it. Things like the hair get painted with a black speed paint color, nothing fancy at all. I do also use this black color on the metal parts of the weapons, or on anything else that will be painted to look like metal. Any details like the wood, wicker baskets, ropes, bells, all that sort of stuff, I paint with a reddish-brown color. Some of these details could be all sorts of different colors, but I want to keep things fairly unified and not go too wild with introducing lots of different colors all over the minis. I opt to paint the skin a sort of sickly color, leaning very heavily into the undead zombie flesh kind of look. I want it to be very clear that these people are not nice and healthy. I start with a neutral gray speed paint, Ashen Stone. Once that's dry, I went back in with a splotchy and intermittent thin layer of mixed Ashen Stone, a bit of this algae green color, and some medium to thin things down, making a fairly transparent grayish green mix. I dot this around the skin randomly, not covering all the skin, just doing sort of random patches of it. Some of the minis where I want more of an actual greenish zombie look, sometimes I just mix up this gray and green speed paint mix and just put that over the entire skin. And on a couple of the minis, like the sort of witch lady people, I do paint a bit more of a natural skin tone, albeit a pretty sickly pale one. I paint all the skeletons with bony matter, and I use the same color for any exposed bone bits on any of the other minis. At this point, that's almost all the colors blocked in. In general, whenever I wasn't sure what color something would be, it got the Battleship Gray speed paint treatment just to make it a bluish-white color and fit in with everything else. And it's a bit hard to tell how these minis are going to look as a whole with the bases also currently almost pure white, so I just thinned down a brown color and put that over the base as sort of a muddy ground look. One big component I've ignored until now is the big billowing smoke effects. If I was following closely to the Sekiro inspiration, this would be a super desaturated purple and white effect, which would look cool, but I wanted to give them a bit more punch and contrast, because I felt that that effect would be kind of hard to parse when looking at the tiny miniatures, and it would get kind of lost in all the other white and purple colors. But to start off with, I dry brushed a very strong purple color very heavily all over these billowing smoke effects. I followed that up with a dark purple dry brush, being a bit more restrained this time. Then I did a final mix of dark purple and black, targeted more carefully to focus on the ends or tails of the smoke effects, or on the very outside bits of the largest cloud puffs. Smoke puffs, whatever you want to call them. For the moment, these look pretty pale and desaturated, but I'll be adding the saturation later with the airbrush. But for now, I'm not doing much highlighting yet, but one thing I do want to do is get the steel metallic color established. I layer a highlight of P3 pig iron, but keep the black still in the shadowed and recessed areas. Then I do a quick highlight mixing some pig iron and silver together. I'm doing these steps now so that the shading I'm going to do next will also shade the metallic colors, making the transition between the metallic paint and the black paint in the shadows a little bit smoother. The small detail items that I'll be painting a brassy gold color later, though, like the small little bells and things, I'm ignoring for now because there won't really be much noticeable difference on these small surfaces. So with that set up, I'm pivoting back to using the airbrush, both to help establish the bright glowing effect more and to help deepen the shades on some of the minis. I started by taking a fluorescent purple paint, which actually looks pretty pink still, and thinned it down so that it isn't too intense, and I airbrushed that carefully onto all of the billowing smoke effects. I'm totally fine with this spilling over onto all the surrounding surfaces. In fact, this is actually what I want to happen, but I try to be careful not to go too overboard, since this can pretty easily blast out all the other colors on the mini. Working on some shading next, I didn't really have any hard and fast rules here. I just used dark grayish blue or dark purple speed paint mixes and thinned them down fairly heavily, and carefully airbrushed those into the shadows of the white and purple clothing, as well as on the larger metal things like the weapon blades. As always, be careful not to blast this too heavily, since it can tint the light surfaces like the bones or the skin or the white cloth very easily. Just like with the glow effect, I actually like getting these airbrushed colors spilling over onto some of the other surfaces as well, but I just don't want to go too overboard here. Moving on from the airbrush, I do a couple of quick highlight passes all over all of the surfaces. Mostly I'm using desaturated pastels for this work, and I'm pushing the highlights further directly adjacent to the pink glowing clouds. I'll show the colors on the screen, but in general I just picked a light, desaturated color that I thought would match decently well with the speed paint I used earlier. If I was really trying to pay attention to details, I'd also work in some of the pink tones for the object source lighting on all of the surfaces surrounding the smoke effects, but I decided leaving the pink color in the shadows and midtones around these elements was good enough, and that it wasn't critical for me to painstakingly refine the OSL effect. This is a commission after all, and I'm doing this kind of on a budget, and I don't want to spend too much time on these. Now, while you watch me do all of this highlighting, I'm going to ramble at you for a quick minute on some color scheme choices. Not trying to get too deep into color theory or anything, but I did make a kind of clever plan for the overall paint scheme, or at least I think it's kind of clever. In general, I'm using lighter cold blue tones for my highlights, and some warmer dark purples and blues for the shadows as well. This can be nicely visualized with a color wheel, showing how the model's colors work their way around this part of the color wheel. The bright magenta on the glow effect is also not too far off from this path that my color scheme is taking through the color wheel. You could maybe see it as a fork where there's sort of a second arrow splitting off and diverging from my main sort of shadow to highlight color path arrow, or just see it as a spot color or something. I don't really know. I'm not a color science theory kind of guy. But either way, since it's not too far away on the color wheel, I still think it fits pretty cohesively with the scheme. A contrasting color like a bright orange would be a little too overwhelming, I think, given how much of the smoke effect is everywhere on these minis, but I don't really know enough about color theory to know for sure, and I don't really care. I just use enough theory to come up with sort of a unified scheme and call that good enough. So, ramble over, and coincidentally, just in time for the highlighting steps to be done. It's almost like I edited the video to time it like that or something. Whoa. So, for some final touches, I shaded the skin a bit more with some thinned algae green where necessary, and I also applied a few feathered glazes of dark plum, which helps to add sort of a bruised look to the skin. I also want to lean into the dirty, rough look for these minis, so I applied a few thin, messy, stippled layers of brown colors around the bottom of the pant legs and dresses, just making them look all stained and muddy. Then I decided that I wanted to punch up the glow effect a little bit more, so I put a thinned, runny pure white in the recesses of the glow effects, then used the fluorescent purple color again to sort of smooth over the transition between that pure white and the rest of the glow effect. At this stage, I also picked out a few other small details, just whatever else I felt like doing. Most notably on the minis with showing faces, I painted their eyes, either opting for normal looking eyes or painting them as sort of a glowing eye effect. For these glowing eyes, I carefully base coated the eye in white, then applied a purple fluorescent paint around it, keeping the middle part of the eye still that pure white color. This glowing eye effect is nothing too fancy, but it gives a good result for how much time and effort is put into this step. Last is the bases, which I am all about. I started tinting them yellow with a sort of dark golden brown and bright ivory mix, but it looked a little bit too yellowy and sandy, so I just switched to dry brushes of light umber and light umber up to mix of ice yellow. To add a bit of variety, I put some dark greens around the base and dry brushed those with a lighter green as well, just to imply a little bit of plant matter there. Finally, I dry brushed a little bit of a light magenta color around the glow effects on the base, just to get sort of an easy, cheaty sort of object source lighting effect on the base as well. And with that, they're done and ready to go be spooky on a tabletop somewhere. These minis actually felt relatively easy to paint, and I really enjoyed the result I got with them. I think a lot of what made them feel easy to paint is that the scheme was fairly monochromatic and didn't stray too far with incorporating all sorts of different colors. I know very little about the game Bushido, but these sculpts are honestly pretty beautiful and my interest in the game has definitely peaked. Anyway, as always, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourself, and I hope you have a great day.